away, and I'd like to invite Nick Clark, North Canterbury Federated Farmers, and I think Pam Richardson's going to join him. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present North Canterbury Federated Farmers' submission on the Christchurch City Council's representation review. I'm Nick Clark, a Policy Manager at Federated Farmers, and with me is Pam Richardson, a Banks Peninsula farmer and former member of the Banks Peninsula Community Board. North Canterbury Federated Farmers strongly supports the City Council's initial proposal. We particularly support the retention of the Banks Peninsula Ward, the Banks Peninsula Community Board and the Community Board subdivisions. As we say in our submission, Banks Peninsula meets the criteria for an exemption to the general principle of equal representation of councillors per head of population. It is, as the proposal states, a unique and isolated community which certainly meets its own ward council and community board. Although we feel Banks Peninsula is fairly represented under the current arrangements, we are concerned about the engagement by the council with its rural communities, especially on Banks Peninsula. In part, we think this is because the peninsula's population is so small and dispersed, and it's so geographically remote that even with the special representation it has, we feel it is too often considered an afterthought, if at all. In our submission, we recount in detail the recent example of this with our negative experience with the LTP's consultation proposal for the land drainage rate. I won't restate all the problems with the proposal, and particularly the problems with the process, as you've already heard it from us loud and clear, but we are strongly of the view that better engagement with rural communities before public consultation would have resulted in a much better proposal and would have saved a lot of angst and frustration felt by many people on the peninsula, particularly at this time when they're already struggling with the impacts of very dry weather and drought on the peninsula. We feel similarly about issues such as climate change and biodiversity, where farmers, as landowners, custodians of the land, feel they could and should have had better engagement with the council. And this is especially where policies to address those important issues that have the potential to impact on them profoundly and put their viability at risk, even for those who already do a fantastic job protecting and promoting the environment on their farms. How do we fix this? We believe there are real win-wins possible for the council working more in partnership with its rural communities, including landowners. We feel the council should consider setting up a rural advisory panel, similar to that which Auckland Council put in place when the super city was formed and rural districts were combined with cities. This is the terms of reference for that panel. It meets formally every 2 months and includes representatives from a wide range of stakeholders plus council. Or the council could set up more formalised, ongoing, regular engagement with rural stakeholders, either more generally or on specific issues, with stakeholders like Federated Farmers and others, where both sides can raise and discuss issues in a structured way. The council's elected representatives and staff could also look at how they can build their understanding of rural issues, taking a leaf from central government under the leadership of Damien O'Connor with its Rural Proofing Initiative, and we have details of that in our submission as well. We talk about all these ideas in our submission, but I'd like to now hand over to Pam so she can give a more personal view on this from the perspective of someone who is of the rural community and with strong links within that community.
So I am a rural champion, and you should know by my past how I've represented my community. I'd like to reinforce that we need to bolster the unique characteristics of Banks Peninsula, are totally opposite to the city, which is flat, and we're very we farm both sides of the hill. The council should be strengthening its relationship with the rural community, and particular with landowners. There are endless opportunities to work together rather than feeling afraid to have anything to do with the council. We are a different community, we work together and support each other, we are innovative and could be doing so much together with the right people. So I think that I've actually got a submission later in the day, just before lunch. So I just think that we'll complete it there and give you plenty of time for some questions, of which I hope you have got some questions. Banks Peninsula is vital. The board and the councillor and the subdivisions are very important. We are not the same in our subdivisions, and we need to be represented fairly around that table when we're discussing matters regarding the peninsula.
Look, thank you very much, and I'll go on to your submission straight afterwards, if you like, just after this one, so that can be all combined together.
Right.
But I don't know if you want to, and we can just flick the clock on another 5 minutes and then traverse it together.
If you're going to do it that way, I'll just say a little bit more, because
yeah.
You know, we've got so many things around Banks Peninsula. In my personal submission, you'll see we've got the Banks Peninsula Community Board, we've got Rod Donald Trust, there's a whole list of them there that I talk about in it. We've also got our four runanga that we work very closely with, whether it's in the Zone Committee or any other committees that we're working with across the peninsula. We work very close with the individual zone runanga that are representative of our areas. I'm in Kokorarata. And my farm's in Kokorata, but when I'm working on Takapuniki, I'm working with Onuku. So they're all different, and they're a vital part of the process as well. So I just want us to think about, get out and be with our community. The council needs to get out and be with our community. We've got biodiversity, we've got climate change, we've got a whole lot of things right in front of us, right now. And we need to be working those things together. And as Nick identified with the land drainage and the issue that we had with that, there was not much consideration made of the rural community, or it shows there is a lack of understanding of the rural community and how things work. So I'll leave it there. You've got my submission. I'm very clearly in favour, we all are very clearly in favour, that we have the Banks Peninsula Community Board.
Thanks very much, and thanks for opening up to a little bit longer to engage on this, because I think that you've raised a really highly significant issue, which is how to create a model of engagement that sits alongside and supports our community board, but recognises the remote status and the different status, rural as opposed to urban. And by putting it in that way, I think you've opened up a possibility for us in terms of how we engage, because it's got to be at an officer level as well as an elected member level, and in many respects the example that you've used could have been addressed by a more closer engagement on a structured sort of quarterly meeting basis than waiting for the rep review, not the rep review, the LTP to come along. I don't know, Andrew.
Thanks to both of you for the two submissions. I'll ask exactly the same question that I asked to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Community Board when they were here a little while ago. You support the retention of the subdivisions.
Yes.
So why do you support the retention of the subdivisions, and why do you think they work?
Well, as I said, each subdivision is difficult. I'm part of Akaroa. We are different. We're clearly different to Littleton. Wairera is clearly different again. It's flattish. It's got a different community. It's got a community that relates perhaps more to Christchurch than perhaps might relate to our side of the hill, but it's still part of the Banks Peninsula. It's the same part of that geological area. It's when you think of the other side of the hill, Mount Herbert's different to Littleton. We've all got different communities around them, and we work differently. Mount Herbert area will stick to Mount Herbert area. Littleton will stick to itself in Littleton. Akaroa, it's just a natural process of where we relate to. It's our home. It's our hub, and we will continue to work in that way, and we need to continue. So, what was the next bit?
I think you've answered it. Why do you support them, and why do they work? I think you've answered both.
We work together.
Yeah, I've got a couple more, but the majority of councillors support the concept of Banks Peninsula having its being outside the 10 plus or minus. Yes. Can you explain why? What would be the significance, and both of you, what would be the significance of putting Banks Peninsula into one or two urban wards?
We'd be lost. Our landscapes are different, our roading networks are different. Because we're small, we would be totally lost. There would be no focus on what's happening on Banks Peninsula. At least this way, we get a focus on what's going on. And we've got so many more issues, in our harbour. We've got 2 harbours. The list of issues is endless. We would be... I can't believe it. I couldn't understand how a city board member would actually understand what was happening out on Banks Peninsula and how you'd all bring it into the light. It's tremendous. It would be just a tremendous exercise. Exhaustive.
Could you comment from a Federated Farmers point of view, please?
Oh, certainly. And look, we would, as Federated Farmers, we totally agree with Pam on this. And around the country, we support particular isolated geographical communities that are very distinct, having that sort of special representation. And Christchurch isn't alone in having that arrangement, which we really support. Golden Bay has that relationship, has that arrangement within Tasman District, for example. And certainly around the country where there is some sort of representation, like again in Auckland with their awards are slightly different. Some of them they have local boards as well. They have the rural advisory panel. All of these arrangements are really critical to making sure that rural voice, particularly those distinctive rural voices, are heard effectively. And certainly we would be pretty appalled if a really important part of this council's representation is taken away.
We have rural Canterbury Primary Health Organisation. Everything is focused on rural around what we do, and supported by a range of organisations to help us ensure that we can live in this rural environment.
Great, thank you. Mike and Aaron and Yanni.
Thank you, and thanks for giving us the reasons why you obviously support the subdivisions. Do you not think, though, therefore, the same argument could be applied to some of our urban wards? When you look at something like Harewood, which is actually quite big itself now, and Heathcote, which has community board members that represent, say...
Mike, please. I don't want that argument to be put to people who've come to argue around the rural side of things. Asking them to comment on another part of the urban environment, I don't know the point that you're trying to make.
I thought it was a good point. So.
Well, I'll make the comment that we're totally different to Hallswell or whatever area, Mike, you're actually suggesting.
No, I'm not saying you're not different. I'm actually looking at your comparison of having subdivisions compared to actually a ward that has different communities as well, that maybe they should have a subdivision.
Look, the subdivisions in my day were put there so that Littleton didn't have 5 members, because it all once again goes with where the greatest number of voters come from. And so if someone stood up in the Littleton area and someone stood up in the Akarara area against the Littleton one would get it. So it's not fair representation. It's totally unfair.
So the reason for the subdivision is quite different.
Yes.
Aaron?
It's almost exactly the same question as Mike's, it's not around Banks Peninsula. I don't think there's anyone at the table that doesn't think Banks Peninsula is its own thing, and it's very different to the rest of the city. But it is the subdivision is the thing. Like we within our areas, like Bromley's quite different to Sumner, and Clearwater's quite different to Bishopdale, and there's various parts of our city where you could say, oh no, they need to have their own. They need their own representation there or there, and there will always be people in certain areas that put their hand up that will... I mean, if Todd Blackadder moves to Akarara and says he's going to run for council, he'll win whatever he wants to run for.
Yes, but it's not for the community. It's not for the community board.
What's that, sorry?
It's not for the community board with the subdivisions. Tom Blackadder, if he stood for council, it would be for the likes of the role of Andrew Turner. It's
the point is that all elections are not necessarily based on where you live, more about how well the person's known in their community.
The question was asked about why retain subdivisions, and the question was asked and answered, and I really want to focus on the issues that the representative from Federated Farmers and Pam Richardson have raised in their submissions. which are in relation to isolated communities and rural communities. So I fear that we're not getting as much out of this presentation that we could have.
I can agree on that.
I was interested in understanding, in terms of your submission, the argument that Littleton is more of a rural community. I get it for the outer basins or the outer peninsula and Little River, but what I'm struggling to kind of understand is, given when the Banks Peninsula amalgamated with Christchurch, or was reorganisation in, that the evidence at that time was that Littleton was more in line with the urban Christchurch than it was the rural community. Why you think that there's still a case for Littleton to have a separate representation as part
because
of the peninsula?
I'm basing my submission, and the Fed's submission too, on that Banks Peninsula is an ecological district. It is a district on its own. It's compact, it stands alone on it in whatever it's doing. And the work that we're doing, we work together, whether it's the Water Zone Committee, we work together, whether it's Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust, we work together,
I get that. All I'm trying to understand is, do you think some of the rural issues that you've raised in your submission would be better addressed by having a specific rural representation that excluded Littleton, given, like, what's the reason that Littleton needs to be within that remote, isolated community?
Because they've got land like us,
Littleton
the rest
does.
of us. They've got high, rocky outcrops, and it's very similar. It's similar to the rest of the landscape of Banks Peninsula. Got the same issues addressing round roads. Water and sewer are the same because it's so steep. Yes.
We're very happy to have Littleton part of the Banks Peninsula Board and Community Board.
The 1989 restructuring put Littleton with Banks Peninsula, so I mean it's an interesting
Yeah, I'll send
point.
you the information.
James?
Yeah, the reorganisation, that was the reason for amalgamation.
Me or Daniel's?
You.
Oh, thanks. And sure, I see it's over time. I don't want to take up anyone else's time, but if you're fine. I guess just my question is whether you had a view on how you reconcile an elected councillor, I guess, for an area, though when actually they're elected to represent the whole city on the whole, and you've spoken a lot about that, a councillor or elected member representing that area, but it's just that the Local Government Act just doesn't align, I guess, with the submission that when you're elected there, you're acting in the best interests of the Christchurch City Council Territorial Authority. So I just wondered if you had a comment about how that marries up.
I think that having a representative from the rural community actually adds to the council's determination on a lot of issues, and if there's no representative that has that is, say, from the Banks Peninsula Ward anymore, I think the council's decisions would be a hell of a lot poorer, frankly.
Okay, didn't quite answer my question, but that's okay.
And?
Well, it is. I mean, look, it is in the best interests of the city as a whole to have that rural understanding. So that's what I mean by that local government.
Thanks for clarifying that, and that does.
At least one round the table that understands rural.
Well, the city as a whole means the whole of the catchment.
We just undid that good work, Pam. I think I was on board until that comment.
Right, Anne.
Yeah, I'm just interested in, you've talked a lot about the isolated communities, and what are your thoughts about how do you connect together, you know, rather than people having to travel huge kilometres to get together to talk and to get consensus on issues? How do you see, that is a challenge obviously, how do you see that can be overcome in any way?
Well, perhaps I should talk about the drought then, and what's happening now is that we're all in drought situation on Banks Peninsula. We've got one central group that's actually receiving information from all the bays and sub-catchments of the area of Banks Peninsula, and they've got working groups in them that are working together. We've got a farm advisor with us, and each community is doing their little work. They're doing their feed budgets and things, and then it feeds into the overall the management group that's over the top of it. So we all network well together.
So it sounds like you've got
Thank
those
you.
networks.
Thank you. Look, thank you very much for your submission today, and for focusing on the key issue that we need to be determining as part of the representation review. But I think you've raised another issue about how we could improve an engagement process between us as elected members, but also from an official's point of view as well. So thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Thank you.
Jeremy Agar.